Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of Check 2020, our virtual conference. This morning we have some really great sessions, and I hope you'll enjoy all of them. Come to as many as you can. This first one that I'm going to introduce now is leasing Windows computers to replace all campus computers. And this is presented by John Haverty from Washburn University. Good morning, John.
Good morning. How's everyone doing? Share my screen here. There we go. All right, good morning. Change video here. So as Melanie said, this is going to be covering leasing computers to replace all campus computers. My name is John Haverty. I'm the Assistant Director of User Services at Washburn University. I'm going to go through just our process that we did at Washburn for changing over from not doing a lease, kind of a haphazard process of computer replacements through the years, and kind of explain some of our past history on that to the point of doing the lease this year that we started late 2019. The agenda for today is outlined there. Kind of go through the process that we did before the lease, preparing for the lease, what we had to do to get ready for it, approval, that type of thing, the actual lease information, what we went through and had to gather to get it, what the lease actually entailed, getting that approved, and then planning and installation, issues encountered. Try and cover some of those that we've gone through. And of course, it's still a learning process that we're going through to, because we haven't finished, and I'll cover that as well with COVID-19, but just everything we've gone through and lessons learned and then kind of summarize everything at the end of what we've seen and going through the process. So our replacement process, again, just kind of a little background about our process before the lease. So this is prior to 2019, what we've done for probably the last 10 to 15 years. We would do the replacement process was for the main campus. So 1700 campus, the main university campus. It didn't apply to Washburn Tech. And at the time, for a few years, it didn't really apply to our law school. It was just mainly the main campus. We would go through and kind of do a first in, first out. So a computer is ordered and it would be replaced during that time when it come up for its replacement process. So we were trying to do a 5-year replacement cycle, and I'll cover a little bit more on that here in just a bit. It wasn't a 5-year replacement cycle. We were probably on a 6, 7, 8-year replacement cycle, so it wasn't ideal, and cover more of that here in just a bit. Our inventory is all manual, so we track every single computer across campus, both PC and Mac. Now we do that in the law school. We also do Washburn Tech. It's all in a manual inventory system that we track and physically go and look at a computer, track it, make sure it's there, update it. When we deploy it, we make sure it's set as the correct room, location, so forth, so that we know where everything is at, and we can run a report to do that. If the computer's moved from one location to another, we go into our inventory database and update that to make that change. It's not an Excel file, definitely. It is a database that we use for it, but it is not automated at all. Something we've looked at this point, we have not done anything with. Our computer placements, as I mentioned, it's been grant funded. Probably the last 10 to 15 years, completely grant funded, which means one year we'd get some money for it, maybe $150,000. I'd do a batch of computers. The next year we might get 200,000, kind of back and forth like that every year. So we didn't know exactly how much we were going to get from year to year to do a computer replacement, which means we quickly, as you can imagine, got out of sync of trying to target that 5-year replacement cycle. We were also battling for the funds. The reason we didn't get the same amount each year was because we were competing with other areas of campus for their technology requests that they were putting in for new equipment in their areas. Whatever the technology was, we were competing with them to try and do the computer replacement for the campus. So we didn't always get the same amount. As I mentioned, some years would get 150, some years would get 200,000. I think the most we ever got, going from memory, was about 300,000. That was in 2014. again, that was kind of trying to catch us up, trying to kind of even the plane so we would get back up to that 5-year replacement cycle. And that was the most systems we had ever gotten in 1 year. It was a lot of installs that year. So again, it was a catch up. As I mentioned previously, before the lease, we were on more of a 7, 8, 9-year replacement cycle. Usually prior to this, our installations were, as I mentioned, anywhere from 150 computers to maybe 300. So it was manageable. We could do it all within just a few months. We tried to do it between, they'd arrive in July typically, and we try and have those all done by December. Usually not an issue at all. The focus prior to the lease and also after the lease is the main campus, and I'll touch on this a little bit as we go into the lease discussion. We are looking at just the main campus. Washburn Tech is not in here. Prior to the lease, law school is kind of in here, but they're now all completely involved in our lease process. But before the lease, it was not part of the process. Washburn Tech, our technical school, that is completely different process, completely different funding. So we do they're on a replacement process, but it's completely separate from even before the lease, and now it's a separate process. Prior to the lease, we were only doing Windows and Mac computers, so everything was being replaced. Again, computer and Mac fell in the same time frame of when it arrived on campus. That's when it would be replaced, first in, first out methodology to get those replacement process done. Back before the lease, a little bit confusing, but we used to do, we'd say there was $1,300 set aside for replacement. So if someone wanted a desktop and it was $700, that would replace it, no problem. If they wanted to add extra RAM, hard drive, whatever they wanted to do to it, we'd work with them to do it. We called it a quoted system at the time. We'd work with them to go through and increase, putting another hard drive in there, increase RAM, whatever it was. If it got up to $1,300, they were then responsible, their department was responsible for putting that extra funding in to get that replacement. That was for either PC or Mac. We were doing that. Again, we tried to set a threshold so that, again, kind of a budget line of how much we knew we were going to be using each year and what we'd have left over so that we could use it for other items. Installation time, as I mentioned, we usually try and do this between, say, July and December, have everything installed. The target was to have it done by December, as I'll cover when the computers arrived on the lease. We didn't always meet that requirement. Usually it was because of changes from departments, but I'll cover more of that here in just a little bit. Up until Windows 10, some of you know this because I've presented this, I think, at previous check conferences. Washburn was doing roaming profiles. Well, with the introduction of Windows 10, we have gone away from roaming profiles finally. We've been trying to find a way to get away from that for quite a while, and Windows 10 kind of forced us into that because we couldn't get it to work, which was good on our end because it was somewhat difficult to support. But it was something definitely that our faculty staff liked. They like being able to go in not only from their office, but to their classroom and have all their stuff there for them. So they lost some of that, but so when we went to Windows 10, roaming profiles went away, but we still had to find a way to basically set up the computer for them. Before the lease, we were going through and doing that manually, export favorites, export whatever it was, reset up all their printers, do so forth for them. As far as staffing, the staffing that we used prior to the lease, we had about 9 techs that would go through, and they're assigned all around the campus. They'd be assigned to their primary building, say Morgan Hall, which happens to be in the background picture, or I'm sorry, the Union happens to be in the background picture there. They would go through and they'd install the computers for that area, their primary assigned areas. Then they'd help other people to get theirs installed until we get everything done. So we had all technicians going out, and of course they do this on their own time. They'd go out and assign it, get it done. We do regular meetings to find out what the status was and how the timeline was going, if we're going to meet that December timeline, if there were any people pushing back that didn't want their computers installed. So everyone was involved in the installation process. Of course, labs, we'd all go in there and help do those installs, but everyone was involved. As we look at preparing for the lease to be implemented, so now we're we're moving, we're into this year. This is 2019. This is probably a year ago, summer. We started talking about the lease. It started going through and trying to make a case for it so we could put it in and move away so that we knew exactly how many systems were going to be replaced. And we'd be able to meet that 5-year timeline to have a normal replacement process at Washburn University. We went through and reviewed the different vendors. We met with HP, Dell, and Lenovo. We had them, they sent us their test equipment, went through and tested everything, evaluated their systems, made a decision. We ultimately decided on Lenovo. Primarily came down to price. We liked the product. We had been with HP and Dell before, previous replacement cycles, quite a few years, in fact, on both of them individually, and we're happy with them. But this one came down to, we decided on Lenovo and went that route. The main thing for all this was just firming up our inventory. So again, it's all manual. So we numerous times went through all inventory for Washburn University, making sure that things were correct, that some system assigned to someone was actually what they had assigned, going through and just basically validating that inventory was correct is what we were doing. So the final counts that we came up with are listed there on the screen. We did desktops, laptops, workstations, and tablets. Those are our configurations that can't deviate from that. We want to lock them into doing a Lenovo that's one of those configurations. Again, cutting down on support issues, cutting down on differences on campus for support. And then finally, the lease did not include any Mac replacements in the lease. We are still replacing our Macs, but they're more of on our old school of where it was first in, first out. We actually have some of those that are going through that we've put 2 orders in. We've actually ordered them. I think we're waiting on the second delivery to come, but that will be it. I think, I don't remember for sure, but probably around 50, 75 Macs were ordered. And that was kind of leftover from the lease that we kept some of the funding that we had tallied up for that so that we could put towards some Mac replacements and try and get them up at least so they're 5 years or newer was the plan. So we're making progress on that. The actual lease, the way it's laid out, it is a 5-year lease. To get this done, we had been trying for years. So those 10, 15 years before, I brought it up numerous times. Our previous CIOs had brought it up. Something we had tried multiple times to do to get a lease for the Washburn campus. And it was always shot down. Usually it wouldn't even get past, usually purchasing, if I remember correctly. It wouldn't even get past that point. We had some changes at Washburn. Some leadership changed. Our VPAT changed, Director of Finance, Director of Purchasing, and our Chief Information Officer, Jim Tagliarini, that many of you know, was instrumental in getting this process. He's the one that got this going, started running up the chain, and got approval for all this. So once we had kind of changes in place for different leadership and those different positions, that kind of opened up this option for Washburn to be able to go down the path of at least having a serious discussion of leasing, figuring out how we're going to get the loan, how we're going to payment, how we're going to do annual, what that was going to look like. So that opened up a lot of the process. It is a $1.2 million lease that we did, paid annually. We are doing a buyback end of lease, which we probably will not do, although with COVID, who knows, luckily we put all this in place before COVID happened. Who knows if this all would have gone through prior to that. So luckily we had this all in place back in the middle of 2019 and things were moving forward, and we have these systems. They are all on site, as I'll discuss a little bit later as well. Kind of going back to what I was mentioning before, some items not included in the lease that we could not do or did not want to do. Mac computers, they're not included in the lease at all. We didn't want to include those. One, they couldn't easily be included in the lease process. But we also, part of our going through and refreshing the inventory, we wanted to find those systems that were grant funded computers and not have those be part of the lease. We didn't want to have those be in the normal cycle. If it's a grant funded computer, medical computer equipment, nursing, whoever it was, specialized for that area, we wanted them to go through and either do the grant again or some process so that they keep that equipment current. We also tried to limit, of course, we put the order in and we wanted to limit, so if a new faculty member starts and they need a new computer, Well, they wouldn't necessarily get it out of the lease. That department, we'd have to work with them to provide them a quote to go through and get it ordered, get it installed, but it wouldn't be part of the lease. It'd be their own system. Some of them early on, especially around December, January, that we'd already put the order in. They hired someone and they needed a computer. Some of those we hope in 5 years when the lease expires, and hopefully we'll be able to renew it again. Hopefully they'll be included in that replacement process. But new department starts or a new person in the department starts, we weren't going through and giving them a leased computer, at least not usually. Make sure I didn't miss anything here. So that was kind of what the lease was, what was included or not included in it. The main thing was just the grant funded computers. But before this lease was all in place, our inventory that we went through, we found that there were a lot of systems out there that departments had that had been purchased through a lease, but when they purchased them, it might be an entire lab, might be whatever it was, that was all included in prior to the lease, our replacement process. So they'd go through, and that's how some of our numbers got elevated so highly, and we weren't able to do the replacement, stick to that 5-year replacement cycle because other systems kept being added to it, and so we limited some of that and went through and actually marked them in our inventory to remove those. We still track them, we still support them, but they're not part of the replacement process. And we've communicated that to the departments. We've worked with them to share that information with them, especially if they're putting through a new grant. We just had one recently here a month or so ago, new grant coming through, and we remind them, say, this is going to be on you when it's up to be replaced. You'll need to come up with the funding to go back to the grant, whatever it is, to get that computer replaced. So now we have the computers that are coming to campus. The lease is in place, it's been ordered. We changed our process slightly of how we did the installs. Before the lease, we had all techs that were involved in the process. When we have so many computers coming, we decided to change it and have a team of installers. Sorry. We had a team of installers, and that was made up of 3 full-time staff, 3 student workers. That team was basically set, and if I remember correctly, about September, October timeframe, right before the first delivery came in. We started getting all that put into place and set, and having meetings, figuring out how the process was going to look like, what they were going to be doing, where they were going to be located, how they were going to be receiving systems, tagging, that type of thing. The processes that they include, again, goes down to imaging computers. So these computers are coming in with nothing on them. We had to figure out where we're going to be imaging lots of computers. We decided to do it on our dock over in Henderson, and tagging computers. So not only putting our labels on there, but of course inventory has to come in and they put labels on and that type of thing. So it's quite the process to unbox everything and put labels on, and our inventory control clerk would do that just with computers. Interestingly enough, we used to tag all of our monitors as well, but again, some leadership changes in the finance VPAT position, and they decided that was not needed anymore. Didn't need to tag our monitors necessarily. So it is just our computers, so that helped and cut down on unboxing and reboxing and all that we were doing. But it was also the team of installers would also be making space, of course, for the new shipments coming in, the old equipment that was coming out, what to do with it, staging it so it could be taken down to some bins that we have that I'll talk about a little bit here, of how to get rid of the equipment and off of our campus when we were done with it. We also changed our imaging process, I'll say. As I mentioned earlier, we have no more roaming profiles, so we still have to image the computers, get them set up, but we did want to make it so that when we put that new computer in there for that faculty or staff member, that they were able to sit down and use that computer, be able to start using it, not have to copy things in. So we started using a user state migration tool, USMT. Had a couple benefits from that. It is free. It worked pretty well. We had to do some tweaks to it. You can use it right out of the box, but it doesn't copy things over like Firefox and Edge, some of those settings that are in there, your printers, your network drives, it doesn't do that. Actually, I think it does do printers and network drives by default, but Firefox, we had to go in and configure some of that to get that set so that would copy that over. Basically, we have the customer, when we're getting ready to go into a department, we'd have them start that process through basically a sequence they would run on their old computer. That started up, they continue working using their computer like they would during the day. And then when we came over with the new computer, we'd sit down, log in as an administrator, and we initiate a process to basically pull in that profile. The USMTP does it for all profiles. So anything that's on that computer, which was helpful in some of our shared locations where multiple people were using the computer, like our student one stop, where their staff are always using different computers over there. That way everything was pulled over and copied or set up on the new computer for them. More on our imaging process. So we did that down on the dock. We were able to do about 48 systems at one time. It took anywhere from 40 to 80 minutes, depending on whether it was a solid state or standard drive. We'd start all those, and of course, while they're doing things, they'd be getting other things ready, maybe contacting people, setting up installation times to go through and meet with people to get their systems installed. The other piece of this, and next slide will cover this more, but communication to campus. Of course, we wanted to get the word out that, one, we got the lease, two, that we were going to start showing up in buildings to do installs. So we did a communication plan out to the campus, gave them our whole list of schedule for the different months, because we had this lined up for about six months, I believe, that it was systems were going to arrive about the 19th of each month. So we wanted to share that with the campus and kind of lay out what areas we thought were going to, that we'd be in contact with prior to just showing up with computers, give them some type of heads up that we would be there. The other piece of this at the end, the team of installers were doing was handling the old equipment, as I mentioned. So we go in, put a new computer in, we have to take that old computer out. You have to find a spot for it to store it temporarily. We did, working with our inventory control. We didn't have room for it. As these systems started coming out, it's something we recognized, obviously, before we started this whole process. We were going to have to find a spot to keep all those old systems coming out. So luckily, our inventory control ended up getting two basically semis down that's on the southeast corner of campus. And that's where we have one that we take old equipment that's just going to be recycled. We're just going to put systems in there that'd be like monitors, keyboards, mice, things that have no value. Computers that have no value, if we put those in there, and those will be hauled off when we're done with this process. And we have another bin that we got set up that we worked with CWG, to our vendor that we went through, excuse me, to do this process. And systems that did have some value, if we got some money from it on a trade-in or a buyback option, then we were putting those in another bin to do that process with them. Initially, we were planning on doing everything, but we didn't have the room for it. It was good that we were able to do the two semis, but we just didn't have the room, the capacity to do everything as a buyback. And it didn't make sense as we started the process, because we got the list from Lenovo, from CDWG, of what would be considered buyback. And I think some systems, there are some that we had that were old, so they were only a couple dollars. So it didn't make sense to even go through the process to hold on to those and have those thin in. So we decided just to recycle some of them. All of this going on, new computers coming in, the installers, they had to make time to take all that old equipment down. It wasn't right there, it wasn't handy because they were semis, so we couldn't put them just out back of Henderson. So they had to schedule time to take those down to the bin or to the semis, so we could do disposal of those systems, get them off the dock, and get them ready for the next delivery of systems. So it was a constantly ongoing cycle that we were doing clear up until the last delivery in March, getting ready for the final delivery to come in. Let's go through a little bit on communication. I think this is probably obvious, but as I mentioned, we communicated prior to the arrival or prior to the lease be putting in place. We communicated out mass communication to the campus about when we were going to expect to be in an area to do an installation. And then we did slightly modify that because we found we were reaching out to department chairs or department heads to let them know we were going to be in the area to install. Sometimes I didn't always get down to their staff. So we'd show up and people didn't know that we're going to be there. So we did modify that slightly. So we started, this is a ongoing constant reevaluation of what we can do better, how processes can be tweaked. It's what try and encourage the team to do, and they were certainly doing that. If they saw something that wasn't working, we'd talk about it, we'd modify it and tweak it. So one thing that we did, probably this is in, oh geez, everything's running together, probably January or February, trying to catch up because we were behind schedule. We started sending out mass communication to everyone in that department, and everyone in, say, admissions that was going to get a computer, they would all get an email message saying, we're going to be here between this time and this time. The technician will be this person. So we did mail merges, basically. So that helped a lot. In some cases, we were actually putting events on their calendars so that they knew we were going to be showing up at this time to do the installation. But it was a constant adjustment and reevaluation of what works best to do the communication to those areas to let them know that we were going to be there. Used a variety of options. Biggest thing we had is that second item there says adjustments as necessary. We would oftentimes show up in an area ready to install, and the people would say, wait, I don't have time for this. Can you come back tomorrow? We do that to a certain extent, but only if we're going to be there in that area. If we were going to be, say, in Henderson doing installs and they wanted to delay it for a week because they have final, whatever it was that was coming up, we would work with them a little bit to do that. But if they kept putting us off, finally we tell them, no, you're going to get your computer at the end of the process. We're going to leave this department, this building, and move elsewhere so we can continue getting through our list of computers. We can't just keep rescheduling these with you. Most people were understanding of that, but it was we had some that didn't understand why we were doing that either. So we do have some systems that are queued up that once we're able to be back on campus, which we'll talk a little bit about here, once we are able to be back on campus, we'll be going back through, finishing up the installation, and then going back to work with those individuals to get their computers installed because they kept delaying us, postponing us for the installation. Issues encountered. Again, it's a constantly evolving, it's a process that we're always evaluating, checking to see what works best. As I mentioned, alluded to earlier, space. We had no room to receive all the equipment. The deliveries, they were set up to be staggered, so one delivery every month, about the 19th of each month. Our first issue we ran into, we got that first delivery. Again, trying to remember dates, this is September, I think, somewhere around there, we got that first delivery. Maybe actually a correction, I think it was October. And then the September delivery, there were some problems with warehousing, with the delivery, and that got really delayed. We didn't get it until the following month. So it was just working with our vendor, trying to figure out what the delay was and getting that corrected. But space was always an issue, trying to find where to store the new systems, where to keep the old systems, while they're staged to take down to be recycled or put in the bin for reimbursement, that type of thing. So that was an ongoing issue. The other thing that we had during this whole process is that when we tested these systems way back when, because we were somewhat doing it in I wouldn't say hurry, we were going through and checking each system, but we didn't get monitors in for any of the test systems. It just wasn't something that we thought of necessarily. So when the equipment came in, this was primarily for the workstations. We went out to install them. Those actually got sent over to our law school, which was included in the lease process, as I mentioned. They got their workstations, they went to install them, had a Lenovo monitor there with them to install, and found they couldn't install it because it was missing the cable. So some of those things that came up, just things that we made a mental check that when we go through this process again, we'll get all equipment in to test everything and make sure everything hooks up and not just assume that a monitor is going to work the way we expect it to work, but actually get everything in, test it, and make sure things are working, which is normally what we would have done previous years, but this was a little bit different. Just we were gearing up and a lot of systems that we were testing and going through that process. As I mentioned earlier, we used USMT to do the migrations. That process worked very well. We had lots of success with it. Some issues here and there that we were able to tweak or troubleshoot and get resolved. About halfway through this, we use SCCM for our deployment for imaging computers, deploying software. Of course, they changed over to Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager, or MECM. That got updated about halfway through this process, not thinking anything of it. We went out to do installs, went out to do migrations with our customers, and it didn't work. Well, when that migration happened, as you would imagine. The USMTP settings that we had to customize, they were overwritten. Luckily, we had a backup of it and we were able to move it over, but it was delayed. I think that was morning, afternoon, however long it took to troubleshoot what had happened. We started getting reports in from the installation team saying this wasn't working. We checked and found the problem. We were able to copy those files over and get them back into working business. As I mentioned earlier, USMTP is free, does take configuration to do, but you can customize it to pull in people's Chrome, Firefox. We do encourage our faculty and staff and students to use the built-in where you can create a Firefox account and everything follows you around. That's what I use, so I can be here at work, home, wherever I'm at, and things follow me around. But a lot of our faculty staff do not use that. So the USMTP allows that their settings for those different browsers, those different applications be copied over. As I mentioned earlier, the old systems that were removed, that was an ongoing issue, finding space for them. Probably the biggest thing that we had for during the whole issue, and I allude to it in the last bullet point there, is weather. I can think of at least 2 times that we had large installations planned weeks ahead. And of course, we come up to those events or those dates and universities closed because of snow or ice or whatever it was. This is November, December timeframe, but they were closed. We had to reschedule those, which of course pushes everything back, have to reschedule other things. So one suggestion or a suggestion that I got from the installation team, when we do this again in 5 years, it'd be nice to do this over the summer. Yes, we'd be dealing maybe with rain, but it might be easier to deal with. It's a little bit difficult to push carts, or we have a buggy cart that we can load up and take load it with computers. Might be a little easier to do that when it's raining instead of snowing or ice or whatever's happening, or just plain cold weather, because it was cold trying to go across campus with a golf cart loaded up with computers and have your face freeze going across the campus. So I had a recommendation when we do this again in 5 years that we try and do it during the warmer months of the year, if at all possible. Of course, COVID-19, that all hit. So we did get our final delivery in March, just right before we left. It was our final delivery. Everything is on campus. It is all scattered on the dock in our another pin area, kind of all around in Henderson. We have it scattered in various areas. So that will be something we'll have to figure out as we go through the process of getting back on campus and just figure out how we're going to start doing those installations again in a safe manner for the team, a safe manner for the faculty, staff that are receiving the system, so that we can go in there and get their computers installed. Not quite sure how that's going to look at this point, but we're going to be working through all that as we return to campus and figure out that process and have those discussions. Because I know the team is concerned about it, I'm concerned, but that obviously was something we're not anticipating. We were expecting this presentation was all, I proposed this back, was 2 months ago, whenever that was. I thought we'd be about done with the installation process. We still have a lot to do, about 2 months worth, probably more like 2.5 months because we were behind schedule. And that issues encountered, I didn't put that on here, but there's always something coming up. Things take longer than you expect. You go to install, things take longer than you anticipate. We're in IT, we're familiar with that. It was just adjustments, and so that pushed things back. Was something we were constantly working with and battling with. Takeaways. I think some of these are obvious. I just put some of them on there that popped into my head as I thought about them. Planning, communication to the campus, planning and the part of making sure your inventory is all current. I think we were lucky in our area because we do inventory for the entire campus. Every single computer on our campus, on Washburn campus, is maintained by IT. It's in our inventory database, whether it's a Mac, Windows, whether it's a grant funded, not grant funded, whatever it is, it's all in our inventory. I'm not sure that everyone is set up that way, but luckily we are that way. Communication was key. I think that's, obviously key in any type of project that you do, but just trying to communicate, more communication, the better. Something we were constantly tweaking, constantly trying to evaluate to find out the best way to communicate to them. Truthfully, sometimes the best way was just to go to their office and talk to them and say, hey, we're going to be here on this date. I know the lead tech on the process, Carl Dillman, would oftentimes that's what he'd do. He'd go there because we'd sent communication, didn't get a reply. He'd go there and say, hey, we're going to be here on this date, and your computer is going to be installed on this date between these times, that type of thing. So communication, whatever form that might look, is always key to do to keep the process moving along. Senior staff buy-in, as I mentioned earlier in the previous slide, if we didn't have that buy-in, we'd tried for years to get this through to do a lease for campus, and it was shot down before it even got started. Obviously, it's something that had to wait for things to happen at Washburn, for staff changes, for people to come in open to the idea to at least have the discussion, but that certainly opened it up, having a CIO and Jim Tagliarini that was able to take the lease and run with it and talk with DPAT, with other areas, purchasing, to move that along. That obviously helped in this process and made it possible so we were able to do the lease for the campus. Expect delays, expect issues, I'm not sure any of us expected COVID, but we'll evaluate, come back and plan and tackle it as we're back on campus. I think ultimately be flexible. I think that's what installers found, that's what all of us found. Whatever comes up, be flexible, be willing to adjust, and willing to work with the department. We're obviously there to support them, but we can't bend over backwards to keep rescheduling their installation if they can't do it when we're there to install, but be as flexible as possible. Those are my recommendations. I think that's, again, probably things that we're already doing in our being in IT, but thought I'd throw them on here for you. With that, I will open it up to questions.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
We have a couple of questions. One was that they would like to ask you more about the user state migration tool scripting that you used with your lease process. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So it is a free tool. It's something we evaluated a couple different options that we looked at for migrating profiles. A lot of them, I think, I don't remember what they were off the top of my head, but they did cost money. Ultimately, we decided on the USMT, the user state migration tool, because it was free. It can be customized, as I mentioned. So you can, if you have specialized programs that you have on all your computers, you can go in and customize that program to copy over just those settings. It will copy over, I don't even think I mentioned this, but it does printers, network drives, things that when they move to their new computer and they want to be productive, be able to print, we didn't have to follow back up with them and do those printing. One of the issues we did come across with USMT, which one printer, I think it was a Canon printer, for whatever reason, that would not migrate for us. We had a couple different people in that department that were that we had migrated, set up on new computers, and we did the USMTP with them, and that one printer did not move over. We used primarily Lexmark and HPs, all those across the campus, no issues with them. But that one printer in that area had an issue where we had to manually go in. It was basically a permission problem for whatever reason. We had to go in and manually set that permission. But if you want more information on USMTP, I have my email address there. You're welcome to reach out to me. Eric Crouch, lead tech in ITS. He's the one that customized and did a lot of work on that, did research on it, tested it. We do that with SCCM again. So we do basically a staging. If we have a software center that you can go in, and so we can have a customer start the process, so they do their backup. We have to associate and say their computer is going to go, their old computer is going from here, their new computer is going to be this system. So we get all that assigned in the background ahead of time. We let them know, or when we're there in their office, we start the process, but they're able to back up their computer, which does all user accounts on their computer to be backed up. And then when the new computer is put in, we log in as administrator. They don't log in at all until we finish with the process. We start a process to restore USMTP for them. How long it takes depends on how much stuff they have on their computer. If they've been using it for a while, they have a lot of settings, a lot of things on their desktop, because it copies everything over. It can take anywhere from 15, 20 minutes to an hour or more. It just kind of depends, and depends, how many profiles are on that account. I think our experience, it's taking 15 to 30 minutes to copy over. And what we did with the text is this is something we started new probably in February because we were having problems. We were having the people start it themselves, but that didn't always work, or they didn't do it. We'd show up and they hadn't started it. So we changed our process and made it so that when we'd come in, we'd communicate with them that we were going to be in there to install on this on a certain date. We would come in, sit down at the computer and start that backup process for them, go and finish up some other installs or start backups in other areas, come back to that first one and replace their computer, do the restore, go around and do that on the other computers. So that helped a lot. But if you do have questions on USMTP, how it works, other information on it, feel free to reach out and I can put you in touch with Eric Crouch.
I'm sure, John, to help with the process of the backing up and restoring, you use a network drive storage for
Correct.
your users. Do they use OneDrive or Google Drive?
We do have quite a few users using OneDrive. We have network drives. We have an N drive, and that's all their files. So that does actually follow them around. Of course, they log in from one computer to the next. Those files are there for them, but their settings. Since we went away from roaming profiles, that if they have settings or something on their desktop, we don't back up their desktop for them at all. We encourage them. In fact, we have a notice that pops up on the screen when they log in to say, don't save things to your desktop. If your hard drive crashes, we don't say all this, but they'll lose it. And we've had that happen since we went away from roaming profiles. But yeah, we have a network storage area. We do have quite a few of our faculty staff. I use it. OneDrive is where I keep all my files. But we still have a lot of our campus that are using network drives.
Okay. And we have one last question. Can you please share some more details about what platform or process you used to image the computers? Did the machines have network connectivity and get connected to a domain during imaging?
Yes. Yeah. So that's our whole onboarding process through SCCM. Basically, plug them in, get them on the network. We have it set up. So we had that down on the dock. We had a 48 ports network connection set up down there so we could image lots of systems at once. And they would get on the network because we had them already configured so they could join. We didn't have to join anything with them. They would start the process and basically go through a task sequence to set up the computer, prompt for the name. We type in the name of the computer, do the administrator password for it. That's what the installation team would be doing down there on each of these computers. They just go down each line and read off a slip of paper that we had associated with that computer to assign it a name, an address, that type of thing. We did look at USMTP can be automated, but the way our inventory, it didn't make sense to do it. But we did talk with someone else, a consultant, about it, where you can automate it. You can actually automate it and have it go through and automatically set up the computer name, the password for it, all that sort of thing. We decided that was going to take more work. And so at least this lease period, we went through and did all that manually. But yeah, we're just using task sequence through SCCM to go through and basically image the computer, get it all set up. It has our whole image out there on SCCM, so that's all applied to the computer. Office, everything is applied. And then, of course, when we go out and actually install the computer, we have to work with that department or that area to find out. Usually we know if they have other additional software, then we have to go through, and some of that we have on SCCM through Software Center. So we're able to pull that in, install it for them, or go out and get it from another inventory database where we can download or install the software, put in license keys, that type of thing. But yeah, definitely if you have other questions about SCCM, Eric Crouch, again, if you want to contact me, and I can put you in touch with him. But he's done a lot of that, a lot of research on it, and does a good job doing that for us. All
right. Well, great. Thanks. Great presentation, John. Appreciate all the things that you had to say. Be sure and check out John's email address if you have any more questions. And you can view this video later when we have finished archiving it. We'll have it ready to review again. Thank you again, everybody, and on to the next session.
Thank you.